Well, movies mean Hollywood. We all know that. They are created as a common language, and when we think of movies, that's what we think of. They're made in Hollywood, with Hollywood stars usually, if they get to travel and be successful. And they're released in America and then subsequently around the world. And we see them in Singapore, in Bangkok, in Moscow, in Ulaanbaatar. Maybe that's not in a movie theater. I saw a great movie there where someone had rigged up a wire hanger on top of a television set. And that's how we watched the movie. But we were watching actually James Bond. So these characters, they're familiar to us. They're touchstones. We know each other almost in a way through what Hollywood creates. That's the way it's been, but it's over. In a way, it's over for Hollywood, and it's very much over because of this region that we're all sitting in today, Asiawood. I'm calling it Asiawood. It's usually China that people are talking about because it's the biggest market in this area. But just as you used to get news from maybe one newspaper in your city or your town, and now that's changed because really everyone now gets news from social media. We have hashtags, Facebook, however you get it. We're actually all often creating news. When news breaks, it's us who are telling those stories. And companies are using them more and more because they can't get that news any faster than we can. So we're not really just reporting it, we're maybe also creating it. And there's a huge change that's happened that has meant, in a way, the demise of Hollywood. It hasn't gone away. There's The Wizard of Oz. It's actually the prequel to The Wizard of Oz that just opened in China several weeks ago, China and Asia. It's a prequel. They're planning a sequel and maybe a post-sequel. The thing is, it bombed, totally bombed, because it used to be that movies made in Hollywood were made with Hollywood stars, and they made about 90% of their money in the States, in the United States. And then, much later on, they opened around the world, and they made the other small percentage there. So there was a reason why you saw all the movies and the characters that we've really come to know and love and that are our touchstones, Charlie Chaplin, Marilyn Monroe, Terminator, etc. But that's fine when 90% of your box office is coming from the States. You can just go ahead and make a lot more of the same kind of movies. But that's changed for the reasons of economy and many of the other reasons that were talked about in the introduction here. In fact, now about 90% of the box office of movies comes from the tropics, right here. Comes from Asiawood, from Asia. And so, whereas Hollywood could make movies that it wanted to make with actors that they thought were great, now when you have 90% of your money coming from another area in the world, and it's not America, you have to start really thinking about your business model. And you may have heard the term show business, so underline the business because it's not show art. For Hollywood, it's show business, and it's a very big business. It's actually the third largest business in America. And it's a huge export, bigger than even the numbers or the money it makes because of the power that movies have held and the way the characters have really come to symbolize movies and America. So now that most of the money is coming from this region, they have to really rethink this business model, because when you make a movie for great expense, like the prequel to The Wizard of Oz, and it really bombs, This is a huge problem. You know, maybe it wouldn't have bombed if the wizard were Chow Yun-fat or, you know, another actor. So Hollywood has started to change what it's doing by changing the casting, and you may have seen this in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean. But the game change is so huge with this kind of reversal of box office that all sorts of other things are happening here. They're happening right here, right now, today. Actually, Iron Man just opened in Asia, and it's really doing well, but who knows how long that will last. So, will Hollywood blockbusters just continue to be made? There's certainly a market for them. This was a question I was exploring in this lab in the Philippines. This is a screenplay development lab that I ran, and this was day one, and there were 9 filmmakers from all over the tropics, from all over the ASEAN countries, so from Laos and Myanmar and Thailand, and they were all trying to write 10-minute short films that would be put together into a 90-minute movie. And although actually we had a common theme, which was rice, every single one of their short stories, their short film scripts, was completely, totally different. Of course, reflecting how different all of these countries in Asia are. Because in Hollywood, up until very recently, Asia as a territory was all lumped into one. But of course, China isn't Singapore, it's not Taiwan, it's not Thailand. Each of these countries are more like Europe, and they do break down the European box office. So we sat in this house in the Philippines for 3 weeks, and we couldn't leave until they'd written their stories. And at the end, although these are not going to be Hollywood blockbusters, they're very powerful stories, and they are part of a trend, which is that local stories are of more interest to the biggest audience in the world. So what is a good story? How do you develop a script? How do you tell a great story? It's too difficult to go into here. It's creative, there are business aspects. You have really a tremendous amount of work to do. And in movies where they've put other kinds of actors, Hollywood has tried to contend with this, but it really isn't working, because it's not enough to just sprinkle through some characters that seem to be from this region. Something else has to really happen. And it really parallels what goes on in social media, because the box office increasingly in each country in the tropics is doing better and better with what they call the local product. So the stories that are being developed that are local, meaning really national, these are doing better and better. And in China, 40% of the money, huge box office of billions of dollars that is made there, is now made on movies from America. It's very tightly controlled. But that will soon change, because they may buy a couple of Hollywood studios actually to get more say in what these stories are. So that was really unthinkable a number of years ago, that an Asian country would buy maybe 2 or 3 Hollywood studios, because it's not enough for them to just wait for these stories to change. And these filmmakers in the Rice Story Lab, they were very well aware of that. So these stories are changing, and this is my story. I grew up very, very poor in a very small village in England, and I didn't learn to read until I was about 10. And this is really where I learned the power of story, my first experience with how powerful stories can be. And however small they are, the power that they can have. And in my travels, I've grown to see how they can touch people all over the world. So my mother looked after children and cleaned houses, and I went with her because that was a way of being with her and spending time with her. And the people that she worked for would often leave out some food. And the kids that she was taking care of would jump on this and start to eat it. So I was trying to think of a way of distracting them. And I started to tell them stories, just anything I could think of. I couldn't read and I couldn't write at that point, but I could talk and I could tell them a story. And if I told a good enough story, my mother could eat. And if she could then take over for me and there was any food left, I could eat. So that really stayed with me, that there's just an incredible power that is now in our hands in a different way, because movies used to be a very elite profession. They're very expensive to make, they're very complicated, the cameras were expensive, very few people could have access to that kind of storytelling. And they were only huge blockbusters that would open in thousands of screens all over the world. But just like social media, and social media has been part of this change, now, if you have a very small story, you, doesn't have to be a blockbuster. It can be released in a different way because you can shoot something on your iPhone and release it on YouTube, and it can really affect and change. Just yesterday, actually, Steven Soderbergh, who's the director of Ocean's 11 and a lot of really huge Hollywood movies, spoke at a film festival, essentially talking actually about Asia and about how what's going on here, the rise of this audience here will reshape the stories that are told to the world. Because it was only that Hollywood started out over 100 years ago that they get to define what movies are to the world. But we're now sitting here and we have the opportunity to be the storytellers of the world. And I'm including myself and all the people who've come here to this amazing region with all of its amazing stories. And so my question to you is it your story that could be told? Do you have a story that could be either the blockbuster, like a Slumdog Millionaire or Crouching Tiger, or is it a smaller story, but that will still find its audience here in the tropics? Thank you.